From what emerges from the previous interviews, the difficulties were not in short supply. Finding ways to overcome these difficulties required a good dose of commitment to leave behind one's own entrenched habits, and the courage to experiment with new methods. In what follows, some students offered their views on what they felt was most effective in fueling democratic fervor in the classroom.
Once we got to know each other and knew what exactly we were trying to achieve in the class with its theory and applying that theory to our classroom discussion, people were more able to feel more comfortable in what they were saying and start to consider what they were saying first and not feel like someone's going to jump on them or attack them right away. And I think a big part of that was David's guidance with it. I definitely felt positively reinforced when he'd hear something in one of the answers that you'd given during discussion and try to help you to flesh out what you were trying to say and build on it a little bit and then ask you another question in return to clarify that he had understood that what you were saying. So I think that was really positive.
I felt that everyone had something legitimate to say and they're worth listening to, which was why the large group discussions were so good for me, I think. It's important that we are all able to sort of feed off of each other's ideas and try and bat around different objections and theories in a way that was sort of non-confrontational and generally positive for all, I think.
And as an overall experience, I would say the individual presentation was probably the biggest aspect of the course for me in that regard. What was nice is that it forced us to take on an issue that we found interesting or challenging, research it, come up with some sort of argument and area that we could present it to the class. And it wasn't just a presentation in that we stood up and presented ideas, but we actually were tasked with holding over a discussion and almost leading the class through a discussion, much in the way the professor would. So in that regard, we were tasked with not only understanding the concept, but being able to move the course, or move the class in a direction that fit well with what people were contributing and bringing up new and inspiring ideas that could move the discussion forwards.
I think that what I stumbled into at a certain point, just because of the structure of the very first presentation that was offered, was that students who presented in a given week could actually take over the architecture of the whole class. And so that wasn't actually in my plan for the seminar from the start, but when it worked very, very well, and I thought that the most dynamic classes were those where students actually stepped up and did creative things to get their peers talking with one another.
Another way to foster students' participation was to sometimes remove the instructor from the classroom when discussing changes to the structure of the class. The reason for the creation of this separate space reserved to students is not difficult. There is a honest give and take at the heart of discussion that the specter of the authority of the professor can sometimes inhibit. This separate space, or students' counterpublic, if you will, provides students with the opportunity to freely speak their mind and to agree on a common agenda to be presented to the instructor. As pointed out during a class discussion, however, this method has its own challenges.
Every time I've done one of these seminars, the prof leaves, and the same people who always talk. The same relations that go on always go on, and some of those, I know in one of them I was with, there was one really assertive guy who, I don't know, I tend to feel shut down by him sometimes, and so I didn't talk because he dominated the discussion. So the professor power relation, I think, isn't always professor dominating student. It can be professor enabling students who feel disempowered by other students. So I think that there's different relations there, and that just removing the professor isn't going to maybe have the revolutionary effect.
The perpetuation of unequal participatory dynamics is a powerful reminder that great effort must be put into allowing everybody to express their own ideas and opinions. This might require a facilitation design that slightly favors the least assertive ones or the least experienced ones.
So another suggestion is also in terms of facilitating class discussion and participation. It's, I think because of the class size, because there were quite a few people crammed into that seminar, a seminar where participation is such a major component, I'd suggest being a bit more particular about ensuring that everybody has adequate time to respond, to formulate a response, and because especially when you get you know, a few people in the class that they've got their opinions and they love to talk, it can be very easy for those people to monopolize time.
Structuring a class as a democratic space is a process that is rife with challenges. To be sure, it requires the commitment on the part of the instructor to abandon the certainty of lectures, of fixed syllabi, and of hierarchies in order to let the students shape the course. This task might seem somewhat off-putting, but as David says,
the perpetual invitation to step into the unknown as a teacher, that it's always magical to just give up control in new ways.
Of course, a democratic class calls not only for a committed instructor, but also for committed students who are willing to transcend their undemocratic habits and to be taken away by the magic of the unknown. What is needed is a group of students who, in Caitlin's words, are strong.
If you find a group of people who are very, very strong, then you can see the professor kind of lose some of the power that he needs in a classroom, regardless of whether it's a democracy or not. And then depending on the group you have, they might be too timid enough, or too timid to let that democracy kind of take over.
To put it in Freire's words, what is needed is an instructor who recognizes to have much to learn from her students, and a group of students who are not afraid to become teachers. Needless to say, just the will to create a democratic classroom will not be enough. But it is at least a good starting point if one is ready to face the challenges ahead by experimenting with different pedagogic methods.
More bigger political action that's more rooted, targeted at the roots of things can solve. But you're not going to get a government to say, okay, we'll distribute things via deliberate democracy if it gets the rap of being like, this is only for activists. This is not about like Joe and Jane Citizen coming and like changing their minds through this transformative experience.
Sure, but I think that's why it's really important that when we develop these kinds of things that we pay close attention to how exactly they're being constructed, right? So are you going to just invite activists, or are you just going to do cold calls and whatnot, right? But even if we do just do cold calls and it's all on climate change or whatever, right? That doesn't mean that the activists themselves outside of that deliberative process can't petition and have their voice in the streets, for example, right? And that's what I mean more so by not necessarily polarizing the deliberative action, but more so complementing it with other forms of democratic movements.